I am back from Oregon, and man, I have never been more bought in to Duck football. Today, we are putting a bow on the offseason, talking about lessons learned and stories told over the last 8 or 9 months. Plus, I am predicting every single game, every single score on the 2025 Ducks schedule. We are coasting up the 101 on this edition of That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy wallawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West. I'm Ted LaRue, maybe feeling a little bit bittersweet sitting in this chair. Of course, I love doing the show. It's like the first time in 20 days that I've done a show. The last show that was on, it was August 1st. It is now August 20th, 2025. So I'm glad to be back in this chair talking about Duck football again. But of course, the last couple of weeks I was in your homeland. The last couple of weeks I was in the state of Oregon, and I am here to proclaim it the most beautiful state that I have ever set foot into. And I've been to Washington, I've been to a lot of Montana, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, a lot of beautiful states in the West. But nothing compares to the diversity, nothing compares to the landscapes that I saw the last couple of weeks within the state of Oregon. Make sure you subscribe here to TSOW because we are going to have a lot of content dropping on YouTube. We are going to have a lot of content dropping on Twitter, at Ted on the Ducks, Instagram, TikTok. Make sure you're following all over. Kind of different content on different platforms. So you're going to want to be dialed in because I'm dialed in and we're dialed in, of course, right here at TSOW. Now, we do have some football to get to. We got a lot of football to get to on the show. We got a lot of stuff just in general to get to on the show, but there are segments of this TSOW fan base that say, hey, Ted, when you get back, I want to hear everything. I want to hear it all about your trip to the state of Oregon. So that's where I'm going to start right now, and I am handing out my Best of Oregon awards. How about we dive right into it? Of course, this was very much an outdoor adventure. You know, when people think of vacation, they think of maybe sitting on the beach and sipping a pina colada. That's not how I vacation. This, what you're about to kind of hear and find out, is how I vacation. I am handing out my first award for Best Hike to Mount Scott, the highest point in Crater Lake. You know, once you clear that forest, working your way up to maybe the most unique view of Crater Lake, you can see mountain peaks as far as the eye can see. You can see Mount Shasta, California's Mount Shasta, on your way up. And then when you zigzag up, it gives you a true panoramic view of Crater Lake, because, you know, on some of the trails, the rim trail, and when you're walking around that lake, you of course see your entire view is just this blue pool of water. But when you're hiking up Mount Scott, it shows you just how big of an area that Crater Lake is within the span of the beautiful landscapes within southern Oregon. So to be able to climb all the way up there and get that view was the best hike, no doubt, that we did when we were there. And we did a lot of hikes within the state of Oregon. Now, I talk about the great view, the unique view of Crater Lake from the top of Mount Scott. Now let's hand out my next award, my best view. And these could almost be flip-flopped, but I'm going to go for my best view, the view of Mount Hood from Tom, Dick, and Harry Mountain in the Mount Hood National Forest, kind of on the south end. Of course, you kind of start walking a little bit flatter. You go up to Mirror Lake, and with the mountain, you can see some really great landscapes with the mountain in the background and Mirror Lake, of course, in the foreground. But once you kind of hike up, and there was a big rock scramble, so we didn't even get to, I think, the tallest point. But once you get to that first viewpoint, it is fantastic because you can see a full scope of Mount Hood right in front of you. Like, you're not too close, but you're not too far away. It's like the perfect distance to be able to kind of see that. And then behind you, I want to say Mount Jefferson. I think Mount Adams was beyond Mount Hood. You can see so many other mountain peaks around you. Man, I just wanted to stay there, and I just wanted to sit for a couple of hours, but we had things to do. Best camping award. I want to give an honorable mention. I want to give a shout out to Still Creek on the south end of Mount Hood. We had a campsite right by the creek. You could hear the flowing water each and every single night. But I think my main award is going to Diamond Lake. Diamond Lake is just 15 minutes north of Crater Lake. I'm sure a lot of you have already been there. But, when you're camping on the Diamond Lake side, that campground, you can see the sunset behind the mountains on the other side. We had a lakefront campsite. I was told that it could get pretty buggy. Zero bugs. It was an absolutely elite camping experience and the campsites were big enough where you can park your car over here, you can put your tent over here, you've got your picnic table and your fire over here, and they're all kind of in kind of different spots, and they're not all crammed together. And when you have a campground that's like over 200 spots, sometimes you can get that. But Diamond Lake, an absolute chef's kiss of a camping experience. Let's move on to my next one. And like this whole trip can be summed up into 2 words: Holy Wallowa. And my Wish I Had More Time award is going to be awarded to the Wallowas. Had to leave at about 4 a.m. the morning of to be able to get to the Wallowas around 10 a.m. or so. But so we only really had like 3/4 of a day in that area near the Wallowa Lake area. But it was fantastic. This is kind of one of the more, from what I've told, one of the more underrated hidden gems of the state of Oregon. Driving down 84, and then you start to see kind of the farmland and the landscape really changing. And once you're driving on the coast of Wallowa Lake, you start to see those kind of snow-capped Rocky Mountains a little bit. That was what amazed me most about this area, is just how the landscape continuously changed when you're driving towards this area. It was absolutely amazing. Next time I go, I think that's the place where I got to spend a lot more time. So I wish I had more time to enjoy, certainly in northeastern Oregon in the Wallowas. The wow factor, no doubt, it goes to Crater Lake. It is such a unique thing. I have never seen water as blue as that. I was up at Flathead Lake earlier in the summer in Montana, and I thought that was clear, and I thought that was blue. But Crater Lake takes it to an absolutely different level. It is just a geological miracle of sorts, with the way things happen with the eruption of Mount Mazama over 7,000 years ago. No rivers feeding it, no streams feeding it. It is truly the wow factor. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Let's go up and down the 101, and I'm going to award my best town on the Oregon coast. I'm going to award it to Cannon Beach. There was a lot of good ones. Shout out to Bandon. Shout out to Florence. There were some really good ones out there on the coast. Of course, shout out to Rockaway Beach. But I'm going to give it to Cannon Beach. I know that's kind of a little bit of a not that big of a surprise, and it is probably the most popular town out on the Oregon coast, but it's popular for a reason. That big beach, you can just walk forever. It's very wide, and of course Haystack Rock, a lot of people around there, but it was really cool to see. And then the town, I had some of the best fish and chips that I have ever had. That fish was absolutely spectacular. Walking around, there was a lot to do in Cannon Beach, so I'm awarding that to Cannon Beach. My best drive, you might think it is the 101. But it was very cloudy. It was pretty foggy when we were going up and down the Oregon coast. So maybe weather had something to do with how I view this. But for my best drive, I'm going to go Highway 58 going from Eugene towards Crater Lake. The forests through there, the lakes, the mountain peaks, very tall trees. As I mentioned, the forest before. It just had everything. It was the most scenic drive maybe that we had when we were there. Definitely within the state of Oregon that we could see. Like I said, cloudy and foggy out there on the west coast of the Pacific Ocean. But that drive, if I talked about before, I'm like, hey, if I had more time, I'd spend more time in the Wallowas. Maybe if I had more time, I might have spent a day kind of camping somewhere in the middle of the drive here on Highway 58. And this one is a shout out to my guy T-Rod. Best pit stop, that being the Wild Duck Cafe in Eugene. T-Rod, the tailgate king, so to speak. I got to come to a game in Eugene just to see what this tailgate fuss certainly is all about for Tony over there. But I had such a fun time meeting up with everybody at the Wild Duck Cafe in Eugene. And it's such a unique type of place. It's right across the street from Matt Knight. Of course, a little bit down from Autzen Stadium. They got the old scoreboard from the old basketball arena on the wall. They got the old floor on the wall, the old floor from the basketball arena out there that you walk on. Like, so many cool stuff on the wall. Charles Hassan-Ritter is the owner, of course, the father of Kilahana Hassan-Ritter that plays for the Ducks. I was able to chat with him. I was able to chat with a lot of other people. It was so fun to be able to connect kind of with everybody. I had so much fun within the state. And I want to give one last shout out. They call him Fisherman Jim in the Sports Chat 503 community. He went out to the Willamette River and he caught some fresh Chinook salmon, frozen, be like, we got to get this to Ted. So I had 2 slabs for dinner one night, had a couple of slabs of smoked salmon for another night. That smoked salmon was fantastic. I've had smoked salmon in Door County from Lake Michigan. It's got a little bit of that fishy taste. This did not have that fishy taste. Had it, of course, with my Tillamook cream cheese overlooking Wallowa Lake. Oh, man. My heart is full, folks. My heart is full after this adventure to Oregon. At the top of the show, I talked about the immense amount of content that is going to be dropping on the TSOW channels on YouTube, or the podcast feeds, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, all over the place. All over the place. Before we get into football, and we are going to get there, just want to cover this first. I want to give you a glimpse of what to expect during the season here from myself and TSOW. Let's talk about game days. Let's talk about Saturdays. Now, I think a lot of you know that I am also a contributor this season over at Scooped Up, going to be writing 10 articles a month. I am going to be writing game recaps immediately after the game is over. And then once that article is submitted, about 15 to 30 minutes following the final horn in every single Oregon game, come on back live on YouTube. It is that post-game show out west. I'm going to come on the air, kind of give my overall thoughts on the game for about 10 minutes or so. We're going to get into the box score and kind of break down the stats a little bit, and then it's time for you to take the floor. Taking live phone calls and text as well on the TSOW talk and text line. I'll drop that number in the description here on YouTube, and I'm sure I'll post it a lot on Twitter and a lot of the feeds and a lot of the accounts that I have out there. So that's a time for you to call in, for us to go back and forth on your thoughts regarding every Oregon game. Monday is going to be our final kind of recap of what happened on Saturday, and then Thursday is going to be the preview and prediction TSOW show as well. Going to be posting like other segments from these shows on YouTube on the days between those as well. Some weekly segments on Mondays. We're going to be talking about not the World Wide Web, the WWW. We're going to be talking about our weekly Wallowa winners, our holy Wallowa performances of the week. Going to be handing out those on Mondays. We're going to be going inside Scoop Duck. We're going to be having staff members from Scoop Duck come on here. Of course, Justin Hopkins, Max Torres, Brandon Gibson. They've all been on this show as well, so we're going to try to get them on every single week to kind of give you up to date on what's happening over there, to connect TSOW and Scoop Duck together. And then our TSOW press pass as well. Going to be taking sound bites from the press conferences and kind of maybe reading between the lines a little bit, whether it's kind of the preview and the look ahead, or reacting to what everybody, coaches and players, said after the game. So we're going to be having all sorts of stuff, and I'm sure there's going to be more that's going to be coming on top of this, but I cannot wait for the TSOW offerings during the season. I've been waiting a long time to say this, and I'm sure you've been waiting a long time to hear this. Summer has officially been wished away. Summer has concluded. Football season is here, and the offseason has concluded. Now, we're going to be previewing and really breaking down the Game 1 opponent in Montana State next week. But before we get to that, I want to put a final bow on this offseason and really take a look back at the last 8 or 9 months. Stories told, lessons learned. Now, 3 things really stand out to me as it pertains to this Oregon Ducks offseason. I'm sure you have more. Leave those in the YouTube comments below. Tweet me at TedOnTheDucks, thatshowoutwest@gmail.com. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with me, so I want to hear all about kind of your final thoughts on this offseason. But let me get into my 3 main points. Number 1, and this is kind of in chronological order, Oregon, they just slay in the portal again. I mean, they are just a Death Star when it comes to transfer portal. They seem to get better each and every single year when it comes to this. Now, whether it's portal, whether it's recruiting, like 3 words really summarize Oregon roster construction. Quality over quantity. We talked about that over the last couple of months when it comes to recruiting. Hey, this class does not have the sheer amount of guys that like a USC class does or a Georgia class, but you look at the average recruit ranking and it is higher than anybody. You look at this transfer portal class, 11 guys coming into the Ducks this season, but they got the number 1 transfer class in the Big Ten, and they've got the number 4 transfer class in all of college football. You look at the rest of the top 10 in terms of transfer portal rankings coming in this year in 2025. You're looking at classes that have like 17 guys, 21 guys, 25 guys, something like that. So the quality of player that Oregon is bringing in is really via the portal is higher, and obviously via recruiting as well. But we're talking specifically now about the portal is really higher than what anybody else is bringing in right now. I mean, since Lanning has been there, if they get a guy on campus for a transfer visit, they close the deal. The only guy that really pops out in my mind that where they've had him on campus and he goes to another school was Walter Nolan. And they did pretty well in that transfer cycle in defensive tackle because that's when they brought in Derek Harmon. That was last season. So they were just fine, certainly on that front. He ended up having a good year. But with some of the gaps and some of the holes that was coming up on this 2025 roster, they just looked around and be like, I'm taking this number 1 player at this position. I'm taking that number 1 player at that position. I'm taking number 1 player over here as well. Here are some examples. They lost a first-round multi-year starter at offensive tackle, Josh Connerly. That's a big loss, right? And here's the thing about the offensive line and why they needed to go to the portal. And I've talked about this before. They did not, maybe some misses in recruiting the last couple of years before things really started to get kicked into gear in last year's recruiting class with Alik Terry. So they didn't have guys that could really step up and maintain the standard that is, hey, Joe Moore Award finalist, one of the best offensive lines in college football. So they needed to go out there and get size. And Alik Terry and company did a great job in not only getting great and talented players, but just getting massive human beings up front of the offensive line that are going to be able to push people around. So you lost Josh Connerly. Yeah, you just go out and get the number 1 offensive tackle available and the number 5 overall guy in the portal in Isaiah World, a guy that some people are saying maybe could be drafted higher than Connerly was to the Commanders at the bottom of the first round. Speaking of that offensive line, you need to step up, maybe play in the interior of the line. You just go out and get the number 2 interior offensive lineman, number 27 overall transfer in Emmanuel Preynon. You got Alex Harkey as well. I know there's been some segments of the Oregon fan base that have been saying, hey, I don't love the idea of having 3 transfers on this offensive line. You know, sometimes that can be, we know what happened last year, a little bit trouble gelling together, but, it's a lot better than the alternative. As I mentioned before, there were guys on this roster that are younger and not as talented as some of the transfers bringing in. This is kind of a good stopgap so these guys can have a year to develop, and hopefully in 2026 you can have some recruited guys that can really rise up and you maintain that standard that is so important up front on the offensive line. Let's talk about the guy that these offensive linemen are blocking for, the running backs. Oregon has a tremendous running back track record historically, especially as of late. Bucky Irving, 1,000-yard rusher. Jordan James, last season, rushed for over 1,200 yards. So, okay, you lose another 1,000-yard rusher. What do? You just get the number 1 running back in the portal and the number 13 overall player in the portal. In Mekhi Hughes, a guy that's run for a couple of 1,000-yard seasons over there at Tulane. I mean, it's just like clockwork, man. It's just like clockwork. You lose 2 safeties, and you kind of look around and be like, oh, that's kind of been a point of weakness. We need to upgrade that position big time. Now, let's just go out and get the number 1 safety in the portal. One of the best safeties in college football. Number 6 overall player in the portal in Dylan Thieneman. I think outside of Caleb Downs, it might come down to Dylan Thieneman and Coy Parrish as not only the best safeties in the Big Ten, but the best safeties in all of college football. I think that's the best player that they've maybe had at that position since Javon Holland. So these are just a couple of examples of how Oregon has a plan when it comes to the portal, and they execute the plan maybe better than anybody in college football. But I kind of have, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the ellipses. You see the ... Oregon slates in the portal again, ... But have they displayed confidence in a lot of position groups with guys that they've recruited, guys that they've been developing and guys that are a little bit unproven, like the defensive line and linebacker. Okay, all together, there's a lot of players in there. All together, one transfer. One transfer. They brought in Bear Alexander on the defensive line. I think there's a lot of faith, specifically linebacker. That was one area where it'd be like, hey, maybe get a transfer coming in for depth behind Bryce Betcher and behind Devin Jackson. Dan Lanning said, nope. We trust Jerry Mixon. We trust Braden Platt. We trust Dylan Williams. We trust Kamar Mathudi, that there is a lot of depth there that be like, because I think Brian Michalowski said this during the spring sometime. It's like, hey, we wouldn't be doing our job if we just went out in the portal just because we have unproven guys. Because our job is to recruit this talent. Our job is to be able to develop this talent so they can get into these roles. So when they get on the field, otherwise, what's the point of recruiting anybody if you're just going to go out and get transfers? You know what I mean out there? And then defensive line, after losing Harmon and after losing Caldwell, man, is this defensive line going to be able to get to that next level? Amari Washington is an absolute freak. I mean, Tion Gray and Terrence Green, Jericho Johnson. I mean, there is just tremendous size up front. I think like at various position groups, there was a lot of faith and trust shown in their development that these guys that they've been bringing in, these top 5 recruiting classes and these guys that they've been developing over the years are now finally ready to take that next step up and really raise the talent level within this Oregon team, because you need to be that elite national championship type of program. You need to recruit high school talent. You need to develop talent. If you just go transfer after transfer and have these huge classes, it's not going to work. So the roster construction plan is as good at Oregon as it maybe as it is, at any school across the country. Last thing I want to say, and this kind of really started in the spring. Have the spring Oregon recruiting doubters learned their lesson? And the lesson is that the summer of Dan strikes again. Remember the spring? Man, TSOW was just a couple of months old at that point. You were missing out on recruits. Guys were flipping, and some folks, not me, okay, you all know kind of where I stood on this, but some folks in the Oregon fan base were saying the sky is falling, something's different, and I won't ignore the fact that it seemed a little bit different, just the amount of things that were happening as opposed to previous years. But we know where Oregon makes their money: official visit season and the summer of Dan. Let's talk about the summer. Why don't we? Because, like, if we come to this point next spring again and be like, oh, I don't know, USC is doing this thing, or this school is doing that thing, or Ohio State, Georgia, whatever, you're losing battles, you're having flips, or whatever, we're going to come back to this again. There's multiple examples of why we wait until, like, the middle of June, when official visit season really starts to kick into gear, to really evaluate what's going on with Oregon recruiting. Okay, let's list off some of these guys. Messiah Hampton, top 100 wide receiver. Really shooting up recruiting boards. He committed on June 13th. Jet Washington, a 5-star safety, number 14 overall player according to the Rivals Industry. He committed on June 19th. Bryson Beaver, that was June 25th, the top 5 quarterback in the country according to Rivals. How about this? That early July surge. Remember that when I was in Montana. Tommy Toffee on July 2nd. You've got Emmanuel Hinacho, a 5-star offensive tackle, number 6 overall player. That was July 3rd. Devin Jackson, a top 150 safety, 4-star. That was on July 3rd as well. How about Jalen Lott, the number 57 overall player according to the Rivals Industry? That was on July 8th. Anthony Tank Jones. Now we're getting towards the end of July. Anthony Tank Jones on July 31st. 5-star, number 1 player in the state of Alabama. And then you've got Devon Benjamin on August 2nd, a top 50 corner, can also play safety over there from Southern California. Oregon is tied with Alabama for the most 5-stars right now committed. The Ducks hold the number 3 overall class according to the Rivals Industry, folks. It's just, it's like clockwork. This summer was another example of what Dan and Marshall do every single year. They make Oregon undeniable on the official visit. They knock people off of their feet. They do a great job on this, and then they kind of wrap things up really closer to signing day. Summer and signing day. Keep the 2 S's in mind. With that, The offseason is complete. You know, believe it or not, that show out west is not the number one college football podcast out there. Like, I know that might shock some people. No, seriously, I think we all know who it is. Josh Pate's college football show is the number one podcast out there. He's partnering with On3 now. He's partnering with the boys, maybe slated to take this thing to a whole new level. He is the number one voice in college football for my money. And he kind of travels around the country. He goes to different games every week. And then during this time of year, he's going to different fall camps. He's taking in closed practices, and he's taking in closed scrimmages. And we know when it comes to closed, Oregon is freaking Fort Knox. I mean, Dan Lanning shuts everything down. So Josh Pate was invited, and he was able to kind of take in the second scrimmage for Oregon, and he talked about what he saw and some of the takeaways from his time in Eugene on his show on Sunday night. I want to play the soundbite from his show, and then I've got 4 quotes of his that I want to break down and give my reaction. So here's the soundbite from last Sunday.
I am in a weird position with Oregon. I think that's the best collection of talent Lanning's had since he's been there. But yet there are some hinge points that are going to determine whether they're capable of competing for the Big Ten championship this year. It's not Dante Moore, actually. Dante Moore I feel great about. Dante Moore is going to be a stud. I really wonder if that wide receiver room is going to have the depth that it needs to it, the versatility that it needs to it. I very much believe in DeCorian Moore. I think they got everything they thought that they were getting with him. But just how that wide receiver room shakes out and how many other guys you have capable of, like a 650 receiving yard type year. Any given week, they could go off for 180. Like, that's the kind of receiver room, that's the kind of depth they need. Oregon's not going to have, like, another guy that goes off for 1,500 yards, like a Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith. That guy's not in there. If he is in there, it's DeCorian Moore. But behind him, what I kind of watched with them is I watched how many different guys do I see that could be a virtual non-factor for a couple of weeks on the stat sheet and then have 6 catches for 189 and 2 touchdowns. That is one of the hinge points. And the other hinge point to me is running back depth because I kind of had an idea in the spring that I thought I knew how the pecking order, the depth would roll out there. I think it probably a little bit more by committee than I would have said in spring, which is okay. That's why you recruit. It's not, sometimes when you say we got to go running back by committee, it means, oh no, we don't have anyone who can play. That's not the case. What it means is you don't have one player infinitely above and beyond the rest of the room. That could just mean you got 3 B+ level players. It doesn't automatically have to mean, since we don't have an A-, we got a bunch of C's. That doesn't have to be the case. But they got a lot of good players, man. The offensive line's a strength there. And so you're going to give Dante Moore every chance to succeed. You're going to be giving those tailbacks every chance to succeed. You're going to give that wide receiver room every chance to sort itself out.
First of all, how great does that new studio look in Nashville? Some really good stuff out there. Definitely an upgrade, I think, from what the last studio looked like. All right, so now let's break down some of these quotes that we heard over there. Number 1, quote, best collection of talent Lanning has had since he has been there. And it's interesting that now once a member of the national media is able to get his eyeballs on a practice, on what exactly Oregon has on the field, that this is what kind of is said. I mean, we've been saying this. We know Oregon has recruited back-to-back top 5 recruiting classes. We know the talent, although young and unproven, is certainly there. But when you listen to a lot of other national media pundits, I mean, you got Bruce Feldman, who did not predict Oregon to get into the college football playoff. You got people saying that. You got other people, like I think it was Stuart Mandel, that was saying, out of all these teams maybe ranked in the top 10, Oregon is the team that could tumble out maybe unranked when all is said and done. Like, you've got all of these things because they look at the broad picture and they see 10 draft picks. They see now 4 returning starters after the injury to Evan Stewart, and they aren't giving Oregon the benefit of the doubt that is given to schools like Ohio State, Alabama under Nick Saban or Georgia, where it's just like, oh yeah, they lost a bunch of guys. They had all double-digit guys drafted and all of this, and they've only got, their triple digits in returning production. People just with those schools, they assume, oh yeah, of course they're going to reload because they're X school, they're Y school, they're Z school. People don't necessarily think that yet with Oregon, but I think this season and this roster is going to be the beginning of that, where it's going to be like, oh, look at all this talent that they lost, and now they just reload. Well, yeah, when you hear about it in December on signing day of this top 5 class and this top 5 class, eventually that talent is going to get on the field. We just don't forget about that, okay? And then Oregon adds these top-level transfers as well. We talked about that earlier in the show, so I'm glad Josh was able to get in there. He was able to see and be the kind of the national voice and talk about how this roster is probably the deepest and the most complete of the Dan Lanning era. Second quote, because he talked about a couple of hinge points to determine how good or not good Oregon was going to be this year. Quote, Dante Moore, I feel great about. Dante Moore is going to be a stud. Once again, there are other national media folks out there they're looking specifically at Dante Moore and his, 4 or 5 games at UCLA and how inconsistent he was. And Will Stein talked about this during his media availability this week. It's like, it's really detrimental to a quarterback when you throw a true freshman out there with guys that don't help him out in terms of making plays and getting open consistently and having a bad offensive line. Like, you turn on that UCLA tape, there's a lot of highs and lows, and I think people, because people are negative, they focus on the lows. They focus on the inconsistencies. They don't focus on how Dante Moore spent a year learning behind Dylan Gabriel, learning this Will Stein system, and they don't maybe focus on playing with much better weapons that are going to get open a lot more consistently down the field. And in the little that we've seen of Dante Moore, at Oregon, he has shown the ability to just make some crazy accurate throws. Remember the spring game, that first drive? I think he just nice touch over the linebacker, 15 to 20 yards to Kenyon Sadiq. And if you've been watching the Under Construction Fall Camp documentary in that last one, just threw an absolute dime to Kenyon Sadiq in the back of the end zone. The thing with Dante, as maybe compared to like Dylan Gabriel, he just has a lightning quick release. And I think when you look at Dante being a much taller quarterback and having that quicker release, instead of maybe the windup that Dylan Gabriel had a little bit, I think you're going to see a lot more levels to this passing game with Dante. I think the middle of the field, because of his height, his ability to kind of see over, that's going to play a factor as well. Now, a lot of people have been talking about Dante Moore and him getting a lot faster. We've seen his speed on the Under Construction documentary. And, we've had some reporting coming out of Scoop Duck that he's really hitting some good numbers when it comes to high-end speed. A lot of people kind of looked at him maybe more as a little bit of a pocket passer. But just because he's like super fast doesn't mean you're going to see a situation like last year against Oregon State where Dylan Gabriel ran a speed option, kept it himself, and took it to the house. I still don't think you're going to see a ton of design run from Dante Moore this season. I think you're going to see more of maybe that drop back type of passing game, whereas, Bo and Dylan had that designed run part of their game as well. But not saying that won't happen. I think they could pull it out every now and then. But I think where Dante's speed is really going to be on display when you get to 3rd and 5, fourth quarter against Penn State on the road, and they got good coverage down the field. Dante can get outside the pocket, and he can run for 12 yards, and he can keep the chains moving. And him being able to kind of get those first downs on key third down situations, specifically with his legs, and keep the offense on the field could be the difference between a win and a loss in some of the bigger games for the Ducks this season. Third quote, I really wonder if the wide receiver room is going to have the depth that it needs to. Now, Josh states that outside of DeCorian Moore, you could see a scenario where each one of these guys, I think this was like, he says, this is what I'm hoping to see, where each one of these guys could really pop on a week-by-week basis. And I think that's what we're hoping. Because I think, we know, okay, DeCorian Moore is going to be the number one target at wide receiver. Kenyon Sadiq is going to be a big-time target at tight end. We don't need, another 800 or 900-yard wide receiver where he's going to have 80 to 100 yards every single week. There's already 2 dynamic pass catchers that are going to lead the way. And like Josh said, if you can just have a guy, Maybe it's a guy 2 times in a season, 3 times, 4 times in a season, something like that. But if you have a handful of guys that you know that they can pop any given week with their skill set, I think you're sitting in a really good situation. Jeremiah McClellan, Gary Bryant Jr., the speed over the top of Malik Benson is maybe a guy that could do that this season. So, yeah, they're going to need players to be able to step up because maybe some games DeCorian Moore or Kenyon Sadiq won't be at their best. That's when you need the depth at wide receiver to be able to do their thing. His last quote, I think it's a little bit more by committee, talking about running back room, than I would have said during the spring. This is in line with what I've been saying recently. Go back to my bold prediction show. My bold predictions was no Oregon running back runs for 1,000 yards during the regular season. Now, Josh saying this, and then me saying this earlier, this is not meant to be a slight to Mekhi Hughes. We know Mekhi Hughes is an amazing running back. We know he is immensely talented. No doubt about that. But I think it's more of a compliment to Noah Whittington than anything. Now, he didn't single out any particular names, but I'm going to single out particular names. I think a fully healthy Noah Whittington can have his best season as a Duck. I think that he can rush for 800 yards. I want to use an example at Ohio State last year. Trevion Henderson was the incumbent, and he was a really good back. And they brought in Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, who had a couple of 1,000-yard seasons there. And they both came together. Now, they eventually got over 1,000 yards after the playoffs, but during the regular season, they were both under 1,000 yards. I could see a very similar situation. Now, he says by committee. I kind of view it more as a 1-2 punch, and then you're going to see segments of somebody like maybe a Dink Riggs, maybe a Jaden Lamar. Been a lot of smoke lately about De'Aaron Hill and his speed, the true freshman coming out of fall camp. So that's kind of the way I see it from a running back perspective, but I think it's going to be a little more balanced than people think. I think Josh saying that, I think, is maybe validation towards that point that I made earlier during the season. Man, I love talking about this. I love kind of having a voice, a national voice that has seen a scrimmage, and now you're kind of hearing some of these things that are coming out of it. A lot of positivity surrounding Oregon right now. I've been saying throughout the course of this show, I've been waiting all year for this. I've been waiting all offseason for this, and this is just another example. It is time for my 2025 game-by-game, score-by-score Oregon Ducks predictions. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Of course, game number 1, the Oregon Ducks hosting the defending FCS champion Montana State Bobcats. And of course, we all know what happened last year. And I think that's maybe going to be on the minds of this Oregon team as we start off. Like Will Stein has said it. He's like, we want to start fast. We don't want to start slow, obviously, like we did last year. Idaho gave the Ducks everything they could handle and then some at Autzen Stadium. I don't think it's going to be that tight of a battle, but Oregon needs to be ready to go. This is certainly not going to be a pushover. This is one of the best programs at the FCS level. Montana State returns a 1,000-yard rusher, 3 starters coming back on the offensive line. I think that's where the strength of the Bobcats is going to be. So I'm very curious of how the defensive line looks. Now, big difference between a really good FCS offensive line and a really good Big Ten offensive line. I still think Oregon's going to have a lot of success, but we'll see if Montana State can get their strength going. I've got a lot of confidence that Oregon can certainly push back against them. The Bobcats have questions at quarterback and at wide receiver, so their offense could be a little bit one-dimensional against Oregon. I think throughout the first quarter and a half, you're going to see Oregon maybe get their feet under them a little bit. Maybe they won't come out and get out to a 21-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. We've talked about it all offseason. You've heard a lot of other people talk about it. Hey, there's a lot of newness. There's a lot of youth on this team. So I think they're going to be figuring things out for a little bit, but they've got so much more talent that eventually they're going to run away with this thing. I think once we get late in the second quarter, early in the second half, that's when you're going to see consecutive drives where this offense gets on the board, for example. You're going to see consecutive drives where the defense maybe forces some 3-and-out. Maybe they force a turnover in there somewhere as well. So I think this is an Oregon team. They finish strong in game number 1, and they take it 38-13 over Montana State. Now, it's interesting is because it's game 1, getting their feet under them, quality of the Montana State program, I think they're actually going to perform better and more impressively against FBS teams later on during the season than they will in this first game against a team at a lower level. And I think one of those games is game number 2 against the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. You know, when this game was scheduled, it was probably, okay, this is a Pac-12 versus Big 12 showdown. These are two really solid, really good programs, but Oregon has gone one way and Oklahoma State has gone the other way. The Cowboys are coming off their worst season of the Mike Gundy era, 3-9 winless in the Big 12. They had 18 straight winning seasons before this, but man, this thing nosedived last year. Alan Bowman, Ollie Gordon, it didn't matter. It didn't matter last year for Oklahoma State. Here's the deal. There was portal freaking palooza in Stillwater. 26 transfers out, 40 transfers in. And here's the thing. Number one, this was a bad team last year. And number two, you're expecting these transfers to be able to gel together. And now in game 2, they got to go on the road against a really talented team in a raucous environment. That is a tough ask for this Oklahoma State team at that point in time. 2 redshirt freshmen are battling out for the quarterback position. Tosh Lapoya, get after it. Send the house. Trust your corners. I think Oregon is going to I think they're going to come out, and they're going to come out really strong and look really good. I think this is when Oregon starts to get into rhythm, and when they start to mash the gas a little bit. They're going to make an early season statement here against the Big 12 team. Oklahoma State had a bad run defense last season. The defensive line is a place, a lot of transfers. I expect Oregon to just pound I could see them going like there were, I think, 3 or 4 games last year where Oklahoma State allowed over 300 yards. I think this could be one at the start of 2025 for the Cowboys. Pound the rock. Oregon, Hughes, Whittington, Riggs, Lamar, Davison, Hill, we might see them all in this matchup. 41-7, I've got the Ducks pounding Oklahoma State. So now we advance to the Big Ten opener, and this one going on the road. And having the Big Ten experience that I did, I can tell you a little bit something about Northwestern. In really no year in the past 20 years does Northwestern have an impressive roster when it comes from a talent standpoint. But when you go there for a noon Eastern kickoff, this is going to be like 9 a.m. Pacific time. It's going to be the first cross-country road trip for Oregon this season. And like Northwestern, it's just a sleepy environment. I think when you go on the road, you're kind of used to people booing you, and when you come out of the tunnel, people talking junk to you, and that kind of gets you hyped up a little bit, right? It kind of gets you in that mindset to play. You go to Northwestern, and whether it was at the old Ryan Field or whether it's at this Lakefront Stadium, it's just a quiet atmosphere. And for some teams like Ohio State and Penn State in recent years, kind of had this where they get off to a little bit of a slow start, and I could see that happening here for Oregon in this game. Now, there are parts of Northwestern. They got Preston Stone at quarterback. They've got some decent talent on the defensive line. Secondary is decently deep as well, where it's like, okay, they've got a little bit of talent. They're like an every other year team. Like they kind of spring up one year, they kind of go down to 3 or 4 wins the next. Last year was maybe a down year for Northwestern. So we'll see how Oregon comes out in this one. I could see them starting a little bit slow, but once again, finishing strong. When you combine the factors that is Northwestern, cross-country road trip, and when this game is being played, and then Oregon, once again, like they're still figuring some things out. I've got the Ducks 34 and the Wildcats 9. Defense plays really well here against the Wildcats. All right, this could be the final Civil War in some time, at the very least a year. I know Oregon canceled their series against Utah State coming up, so that might make room for Oregon State in the future. But this is a Ducks team that, okay, they'd be coming off of a performance, where maybe they were a little bit sluggish to start against Northwestern, and they want to make a statement because of that, number one. Because of number two, I mean, it's their in-state rival. It's Oregon State. And number 3, they want to be playing their best. They want to be confident going into that big game against Penn State the very next week. Last season, we know what happened in Corvallis. The Ducks, 49-14 over the Beavers. And the Beavs last year went 5-7. They were not a good team under Trent Bray. Oregon State, this is interesting to note, last in the FBS in sacks was 7. Now the Beavers went out. They got a couple more transfers coming off the edge. We'll see if that helps. But if they don't get pressure on Dante Moore, and if they can't play on the other side of the line of scrimmage, or at least kind of push back a little bit against Oregon's offensive line, this is going to get out of hand, and it's going to get out of hand quick. And I could see that certainly happening here at Autzen. I think Oregon State, like, Anthony Hankerson was a 1,000-yard back last year. Trent Walker. Malik Murphy transferring in was just named the starting quarterback. But here's the deal. They lose 4 starters on the offensive line. I think that was a big part of why Hankerson rushed for over 1,000 yards last season. There's been injuries in the spring and fall. Malik Murphy was kind of running around during the spring game, it sounds like, a little bit. So if that offensive line is not shored up, could this be Washington 2.0 where they get like 9 or 10 sacks? The defense isn't very deep. It's not very talented for OSU as well. I could see this being a huge day for Oregon's defensive line getting after Malik Murphy. I've got the Ducks 45 and the Beavers 10 in this game. All right, that gets us to the big one. Happy Valley, Pennsylvania. The Penn State Nittany Lions. I mean, the storylines write themselves for this game, don't they? Right? A rematch of the Big Ten Championship. This could be a top 5 matchup when it happens. I mean, a whiteout in Happy Valley. The Penn State fans have been yearning for a big-time whiteout. They've had teams like Minnesota and Washington and other kind of mid-tier kind of Big Ten teams for that whiteout in recent years. They had Auburn when Auburn was barely in the top 25. So to be able to have this game against a really good team, the crowd is going to be juiced. It's going to be Big Ten Saturday night. James Franklin, we know the narrative. He can't win that big game, and this is a big game at the end of September. If this game was like at the end of October or early November, I might pick Oregon to win this game. But right now, I'm going to pick Penn State to win the game. And I think like this game kind of comes down to a couple of different things. I think Penn State all year is going to look to play with power. They've got a handful, I think 4 returning starters, guys that started on the offensive line last year. They've got that great running back tandem in the backfield. This is going to be a huge test for where exactly Oregon's defensive line is. Penn State rushed for nearly 300 yards against them last year in the Big Ten Championship. So let's hope that it's shored up for Tony Tuiotti's group up front. And then for Oregon, like, I'm not saying it's a bad unit, but I think like if you were to take all the position groups for Penn State and try to find a weakness, it's probably the secondary. So I think Oregon wants to get explosive in this game. See if you can turn it into a little bit of a track meet. Okay, I know Penn State's got maybe some better wide receivers out there, but that's not the way they want to play. So this is going to be, I think, a little bit of a contrast of styles within this football game a little bit. I think it's going to be close. I do not see this one being double digits either way. I think this one goes down to the wire. But I think the Penn State, just having that experience early in the season, I know Oregon would be a quarter of the way through the season, and they better use those first handful of games, those first 4 games, to get everything figured out situationally and depth-wise and rotation-wise so that they can play their best and that they're in a good position to possibly come out with a win. But I think the experience early in the season plays into the advantage of Penn State. I got the Nittany Lions winning barely 27-24 over the Ducks. Now, time to take a deep breath. It's time for a bye week. After the bye week, come the Indiana Hoosiers. Now, Indiana was 11-1 last season. I think Indiana's got a really good roster. I think they have as good or a better roster as last year. Now, something that's worth noting, Oregon and Indiana are both coming off of bye weeks. So Curt Cignetti, 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Dan Lanning, 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Who is going to use that time better than the other? Who's going to be able to win that preparation chess match, that game plan chess match, so to speak? I think we're going to find that out kind of early within this football game. I think this is going to be one of the best passing attacks that Oregon will face against Indiana. Now, here's the thing again about IU. They've got a notoriously weak non-conference schedule. And then before this, they play home against Illinois and at Iowa. So this could be a team that could be kind of reeling off of 2 straight losses. They could be sitting there at 3-2, but they also could be sitting there at 5-0. If they're able to beat the Illini and if they're able to beat the Hawkeyes, this is at the very least a top 15 matchup. And this one's got some big time juice to it. And we know how Curt Cignetti loves to add juice to maybe some of these games that he's playing and matching up against some of the bigger and the badder teams. So this is going to be a challenge. I think last year when Indiana faced off against Ohio State and Notre Dame, their offensive line struggled. So we'll see if Oregon can try to replicate that. I think Oregon actually comes out and plays really well. I think they've got an extra week to think about that loss to Penn State, and they come back with a vengeance but they don't necessarily blow Indiana out of the water. I've got the Ducks 31 and Indiana 17. Now, this is the time we're at about the halfway mark through the season, okay? We're at the halfway mark. And I think now you've got 5-6 games under the belt of some of these young players, and they've kind of learned, and I think they're trying to, and I think now they start to get into rhythm. And now I think is the point in the season where you start to see this Oregon team really start to stretch their legs. After the game against Indiana, they go all the way across the country to take on the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Rutgers is a senior-laden team on the offensive line. They lost Kyle Monungai, who rushed for 1,000 yards each of the last couple of seasons. They're going to maybe do a by-committee type of thing in the backfield. A lot of transfers on this team. Good transfer class, but a lot of transfers that they're expecting to gel together. Have they kind of worked out? Have some of these transfers hit? Have some of these transfers misses? I think that's going to be the big question for the Scarlet Knights as of right now. This game feels a little bit more grimy to me. That's kind of just the overall feeling I have. That's kind of the way like Greg Schiano tries to make these games. But I look at Rutgers offense, especially being in the middle of the year, and once the secondary gets games under their belt, Ethan Kaliak-Manis is just like, he's not going to be able to throw the ball like against this secondary. That's what I believe in this game. Like, he had a decent season last year, but he's been an inconsistent quarterback throughout his time in the Big Ten. And if Oregon can get after Kaliak-Manis, that's when he really starts to fade apart. I would be surprised right now if Rutgers scores above 17 points in this game. I really would be. But I think Oregon is going to try to win the battle at the line of scrimmage. I could see them really pounding the rock in this game. I've got the Ducks 30 and Rutgers 6. Next game, it's the tie-dye game at Autzen Stadium, the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, everybody knows about Wisconsin's crazy schedule this season. It's the end of a stretch. They play Michigan at Iowa versus Ohio State, and then they've got this game at Oregon. I think they're going to be worn down. I mean, playing that many quality teams in a row, especially coming off of that game against Ohio State, I think it's going to be tough for them to kind of spring up after that, especially if all of those are losses, which I don't think they're going to be favored in any of those games. So for them to be able to spring up and have the type of performance that they did last year, I just don't see it happening. Last year was the end of an 8-game stretch for Oregon, so they were a little bit tired. They were a little bit worn down, but we know Oregon has a tremendous talent advantage in this game. Once again, I think Oregon could dominate in the run game. I think the strength of the Badgers' defense is probably in the secondary. So I think attacking this smaller defensive line is the way to go. Mackay, Noah, I think they could have a big time output in this game. I've got the Ducks winning 40-14 over Wisconsin in this one. Then you have a bye, and now comes the month of November. And the month of November, I think it's got some maybe some possible bumps in the road. It's not going to be an easy month to finish the season. If they want to go 11-1, they are certainly going to have to earn it. The first one is going on the road to Kinnick Stadium to face off against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Look, here's the thing about Iowa. Kinnick Stadium is a very tough environment to play in. And when I look at Iowa, even though they lost Caleb Johnson, who was one of the best running backs in college football last year, this is an offensive line that's one of the best in the Big Ten, if not one of the best in the country. They've got one of their best quarterbacks that they've probably had since 2019. Mark Gronowski is just an absolute winner, transferring over from South Dakota State. And it's a Phil Parker defense, so you can rely on them to be really good. I think this is as close to the rock fight like Wisconsin that we're going to see this year. But I don't think it's going to be that ugly type of rock fight. I think that this is going to be a hard-fought game in the end. But I think Oregon's just got way too much talent in this game. That's the thing. When I look at all these potential hiccups, I look at it and I see yeah, but Dan Lanning just wins against the teams that he's supposed to win against. Okay, you haven't really seen a big upset in the Dan Lanning era yet. So he has his team really focused when he plays a team where where Oregon has the target on their back, where maybe a team that's much less talented than them. So they usually take care of business. With Iowa, I think defensively, the strength of Iowa is probably on the defensive line. You kind of saw it a little bit last year. Teams took their shots against Iowa and hit some big plays deep. I think there's going to be a couple of big plays in this game that make the difference, and Oregon wins 26-16. Hard-fought early November Big Ten football game, but they come out on top. Now they turn around and play a Friday night game against Minnesota. And here's the thing about this. Minnesota is coming off of a bye week. So bye week for the opponent, short week for Oregon. Could this be a recipe for something? Look, I like Minnesota. I think at this point in the season, Minnesota could be like 7-2. They could be 6-3 at that point. I really believe that. Now, I think their questions are offensive line at quarterback, not great spots to have question marks. I will certainly say that. What does their quarterback situation look like with Drake Lindsey at this point? I think that's going to determine a lot of how competitive Minnesota can be against Oregon. But I think here's the fact of the matter. When PJ Fleck in Minnesota, when they go on the road to face off against some of these big-time teams, it usually doesn't end up well for them. The margin of victory for the favored team and not Minnesota is usually pretty wide. And that's how I see this one at this point in time. I think this is an opportunity to maybe make a later mid-November type of statement for the Ducks. I think they come out like that secondary is really good. That is a ball-hawking secondary. I think it is going to be one of the bigger challenges for Oregon throwing the football. I mean, Coy Parrish is back there. He's one of the best players in all of college football. So key for them, avoid turnovers. Minnesota very aggressive. And Minnesota is going to look to take the ball away and create better situations for their offense. But I've got the Ducks winning this one 32-13 in convincing fashion over Minnesota. Now the time where you start to get excited because this is the West Coast rivals portion of the program. This is probably it's definitely the most anticipated home game. Maybe it's the most anticipated game of the season. The Oregon Ducks against USC. Now, USC could be in a variety of spots, and I think like this one is one of the toughest games to predict because USC has a great tandem at wide receiver. We'll see what Maeva is like at quarterback. I don't think their offensive line is going to be great. I don't know if it's going to be better than last season. I think that's a big question. I think there's parts of their like their defensive line is pretty good in this game. I think both offenses are going to look to throw it around. I think that this is going to be a game that might go back and forth a little bit. But I just have that stadium. Autzen is just going to be absolutely on fire. I'm not saying it's going to be at the level of like the Ohio State game last year, but this is going to be the hottest that Autzen will be all year long. And I just have a hard time believing that USC, even if they're really good at this point, even if they're sitting there with a possible playoff spot maybe in grasp, like they're a 2-loss team and this is an opportunity for them to get a big-time quality win, I just don't see Oregon losing this game. I don't, but I think you're going to see some offense back and forth. This could be one of the biggest challenges for the Ducks secondary with that great wide receiver tandem on the outside. I've got Oregon 38 and USC 24, which leads us to the rivalry game. It is tough to go and play in Seattle, folks. That is not easy. We all know what happened the last time Oregon made their way up north. Washington, Damon Williams, Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston, like we all know, I think what they have from a skill position standpoint and how exciting that they could be. I think that this is going to be a closer game. Washington is going to be, they're getting to be a little bit of a sexy pick to maybe make a 9 or a 10 win season type of run. And we know there is going to be a lot of juice, just how Oregon absolutely laid it on the Huskies last season. There's going to be motivation on the Washington side, no doubt about that. But I think this one, like USC, I think that these two games, I think are the offenses are going to be on display. But I think Oregon finds a way to win, pulling away late, 37-27 over Washington. Would not be surprised me to see this one 27-all at the end of the third quarter, and then you go into the fourth quarter, and the Ducks find a way to pull away. The defense holds strong and puts up a goose egg in the fourth quarter. So I've got Oregon finishing 11-1. I think Ohio State and Penn State could also be 11-1. Next week's show, I'm going to get to my playoff preference on where I think where I would kind of like to see the Ducks maybe get slotted into a potential college football playoff scenario. But I'm holding strong at 11-1. I think they're going to be more talented than a lot of teams, almost every team on their schedule this season. That wraps up another great edition of That Show Out West. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow on the podcast feeds, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. So until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.